new fees on customers, totaling about $672 million to replace all of the natural gas pipeline infrastructure in DC. And so they say that this is necessary to maintain infrastructure and fix leaks. But in reality, this would mean reinvesting millions of public dollars into fossil fuel infrastructure, and they don't actually address the leak pipes that need to be replaced. And so basically, we're just sinking money into infrastructure, the fossil fuel infrastructure that needs to be eventually replaced, and hopefully sooner rather than later, with electrification. And so we want to ask all of you to send an email to the PSC and how do we oppose this deal. So here we have a QR code that'll lead to an action network with a template for how to do this. And just wanted to mention that, you know, WePower is actively coordinating with other groups in the city to try to stop this build out. The public comment period is open until June 16th. So if you're interested, this would be great. And so I can also pause to let people kind of get this QR code and maybe also see if there's any questions on any of that before I move on to the next section. Thank you all. I see lots of thumbs and I see a hand in the back. Yeah, they're basically just focused on like replacing gas pipes that work just fine, rather than, you know, like seeking out leaks. So they're not necessarily like, they aren't measuring where the leaks are occurring, you know. So it's kind of just replacing infrastructure that already exists. Yeah.
There are absolutely no major electric cooperatives in the area. Like Maryland, Virginia, it's here.
So what do you mean by electric cooperative?
It's off in South Carolina.
Okay.
We have Dominion Energy, like in the private, like energy company, but like most of like our state is covered by electric cooperatives. It means that like people actually own like the actual facilities.
Okay.
So
that's interesting. So what is the, well, sorry, we can talk about this. I'm very curious how that works, but no, I don't believe that we are covered by an electric law. Yeah, I would love to hear more about how that works though. I'm very curious.
the other groups. Yes.
Oh yeah, so the question was what other groups are working on the gas opposition. So you know, off the top of my head, I know Sierra Club is organizing against this. I'm not sure if anyone else is familiar with other groups.
CCAN.
What's CCAN, which stands for what? Chesapeake Climate Action Network. Thank you. Yes, Chesapeake Climate Action Network.
Extinction Rebellion is part of it. And then a few others as well.
Yes, apologies. I am not directly involved in that, but we can get you more specifics.
Could I speak up?
Sure, you can speak up, but I'll repeat the question as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, are PEPCO watching gas unionized, and what kind of role would the unions play in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer. But I think that, yeah, I think that, you know, unions are important, but a different part of the issue in terms of like, you know, making sure that workers get fair pay and compensation. But I don't know that necessarily, like, I think that if we had a publicly owned utility, we can ensure that it was unionized. Yeah.
I think, so I do know that, I don't know about gas, but I do know PEPCO's workers, some of them are part of IBEW, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. PEPCO also helps actually fund like a school for electrician training in Southeast. So those are two things that actually provide like not only an avenue for PEPCO to work with some organized labor and like public training, but also an avenue for us to do the same thing in a green electrification project. I don't know the answer to that, but
Cool. Are there any questions online or should I move on? Yes, PEPCO workers are unionized out of IEW chapters.
got it.
Great. Cool. Oh yeah. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the current status of utilities in DC, like a health check. How are they doing? How are they serving us? If we look at the amount of dividends that Exxon has paid to shareholders, they total in the billions of dollars for each of the past few years. And if we look at the total shut-off costs, it's in the tens of millions of dollars. So there are a substantial amount of money coming from shut-offs, but it's nowhere near the amount of dividends that Exxon has paid on. So just a fraction of this dividend that they had instead used that not to shut power off to people that need it. This would have been easily prevented. So it's kind of interesting to see the like orders of magnitude of profit here. And so shutoffs actually were paused during the public health emergency due to COVID. And so you can see that initially in the first few months of 2020, there were shutoffs, but then they stopped once the pandemic started, and there were no shutoffs in 2021. But then more recently, the public health emergency expired in DC, and shutoffs were unfortunately restarted. If we look at the energy mix for Pepco, you can see that it's primarily coal and natural gas. It does have a substantial portion of nuclear as well, with very little renewable energy sources, and they're also not increasing, unfortunately. So there are incentives to try to shift this towards more renewable commitments, because DC has some of the most ambitious climate goals in the country. And of the solar projects that we do have, there have been reports that Pepco is systematically mishandling these. So this is happening both at the community and the household level. And so in 2018, the DC Solar for All program had a target of serving 100,000 households, but up to date, they've only served 364. And so in the past 5 years, they've only managed to serve hundreds out of the hundreds of thousands that are supposed to be have solar installed. There was a report of Pepco fee to install rooftop solar for a couple that had bought solar panels and wanted to plug them into the grid. Pepco said, thanks, that's great, that'll be $20,000. This is the upper bound, but some the fees for installing solar panels into the grid can be exorbitant. And the DC Attorney General also kind of did an investigation of the Community Solar for All program and found that over 6,000 customers were being overcharged by Pepco for community solar. And in reality, community solar is supposed to reduce rates for people that need them or can afford to pay their bills, but actually it can cause increased rates, which is not what we want. Pepco is also using the energy transition as an excuse to raise rates. So they're looking for a 10% return on equity for more than $300 million per year of investments for a distribution grid. And they're also looking to impose a fixed charge of $29.60 on residential customers, all for what they say to enable this transition to clean energy. And so, DC residents are kind of being forced to foot the bill for this transition that isn't really happening. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Claire to talk about how municipalization can be a better way forward.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Yes, so I'm going to talk a bit about, in contrast to kind of what that system looks like, what are some of the key problems that we would want to fix under a municipalized system, and sort of why would municipalization help us to get there? And municipalization is a big word that I might mispronounce many times and get caught in my mouth. But basically that would just mean like a public ownership of the utilities, a government ownership of the utilities. And there's a lot of different ways that that system could actually look like in practice, from more of like a government operated model to a community run model. And the details of that are something that WePower DC is still like working on. What do we want to advocate for and what would work best in DC? So we're going to talk about it a bit in general terms. But basically our vision for what we want the energy system to look like is we want a clean, affordable, and equitable energy system that's owned by the people, is governed by expert and accountable residents, and it operates for the benefit of the people. Obviously, owned by the people is different from the current system where it's owned by corporations. Governed by expert and accountable residents. In theory, the PSC and the DC government have a role in regulating our utilities, but the extra step of having a corporation in there means that there's a lot of other people involved in the system that don't need to be there. And those other people are getting dividends, and that profit margin is really what the system's being run for, not for the benefit of people getting the services. One of the really central tenets to how the system would be different from the current one is a more acute focus on energy justice. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but to break it down a little further, these are kind of the 4 pillars of what energy justice really means. First is equity. So that is that people are able to access the system according to their needs, whatever they might be, and acknowledges the fact that different people have different needs. Affordability, narrowing in on the fact that what's affordable for one person might not be affordable for another because people will make different incomes, people have different other costs in their life. So taking an equitable lens on affordability and what that actually means for each person. Accessibility, making sure that every person is able to access power and gas as needed for whatever their power needs are. And then participation, that people are able to participate in the system, not only by receiving services, but also through, giving their opinion on, does the service work for them? What do they want to see within the system? And they're able to give comments and actively participate without a lot of the sort of barriers that PEPCO has been known to put in the way. And if we have more of an energy justice focus in our energy system, what might we be able to achieve? Well, first, one goal would be to end electricity and gas shutoffs. In the current system, utility companies shut off ratepayers who are not able to pay their bills. And there's many studies out there that prove that, which obviously makes sense, the people most likely to be shut off, the people least likely to be able to pay their bills, are the ones who have other burdens on their other lifestyle burdens, like they might be low income, they might have health concerns, they might be elderly, they might have children, lots of other things that they need to spend their money on. And DC does have sort of assistance programs that can help people, but they're difficult to sign up for. You have to know where to go, know how to sign up, be able to fill out the form in the language that it's in. And sometimes assistance isn't enough, and people still don't have funds. So a municipalized system would be able to create a better system that just could ban shutoffs or create a better way to end them. We can also decrease rates overall for everyone and increase parity with the percent of income spent on utility bills. So people with the lowest income tend to spend the most on essentials like energy bills. And with a municipalized system, we would have more control and be able to change that through changing the way that rates are determined, for example. We can also expand green energy to reduce pollution. So DC, as we've said, is one of the cities that has one of the most ambitious climate plans, but the way that it's actually implemented doesn't necessarily lead to actually more green energy being used to power our system. If you remember the chart that Catherine just showed. So with a municipalized system, we can have more accountability, and therefore we can more accurately hold them accountable to actually integrating green energy fuel sources into the system. And all of this is really based on the idea that a municipalized system that integrates more energy justice principles can allow ratepayers to have a direct say in how their utility is run. Rather than having, first of all, it cuts down an actor by removing a private corporation, but it also cuts down all of the people who care about what happens to the private corporation and centralizes the people who are receiving the services as the ones who are most involved in deciding the policies of that system. So to summarize all of that, why do we really want public power? How does public power and municipalization get us to some of those goals? First of all, it creates community control and collective ownership. It really emphasizes the principles of an energy democracy and allows us to control how we source and how we distribute our power. We can inject our own values into how those decisions are made and how we decide to source and distribute power. It allows us to lower rates and redistribute wealth and investment to support all DC residents. We can decide to invest most in communities whose energy system and power grid is most often not invested in. And they do need improvements to make sure their energy is reliable. And we can make better rate systems, again, that focus on parity of income. And then we can also build towards climate justice and build a renewable and reliable, resilient grid that is focused on climate goals and uses green energy. So as we said, WePower DC is fighting for public power in the districts, but public power is a national movement. It's very central to the Green New Deal and DSA chapters across the country, and public power campaigns across the country are common. There's been lots of wins in public power as well, and we see public power across the country. There are some that are recent campaign wins, the most recent being in New York State, which was big news of the New York State moving towards public power. But there's also examples of public power that have gone back decades, and even like over 100 years. There are places that have operated with public power, from towns to cities to entire states that operate with this model. So it's certainly a viable model, and it also takes a lot of different forms in different places. So obviously somewhere like Clyde, Ohio, that has less than 3,000 customers isn't going to operate the same way as Long Island, New York, that has over 1 million, or DC. You have to create different systems, but the benefit of public power and municipalization is that it is publicly owned, and we make the system that we want that's going to work best in this exact location. So there have been many successful public power campaigns across the country, and what these campaigns really do is they take advantage of the specifics of the place that they're in. What are the politics like? How is the utility being regulated right now? How can we target specific people that have the power to make different changes? It's not news that DC is a unique place. It's not a state, it's a city, and it's this district. We have kind of a weird government. So we do have to be aware of how can we build political power? How can we build the argument that this is going to have economic benefit, community benefit, and build a strong coalition across people with different interests to build a power system that serves the whole district, because that really is the goal. But even if we don't get to a publicly owned utility, there are still a lot of things that can be gained along the way, and as we fight for that goal. First of all, it can lead to rate relief. Building this fight brings attention to the fact that there are people that do struggle to pay their utility bills and do experience shutoffs, which is something that many residents might not think about regularly. So we can build awareness with our political officials and our fellow residents that this is an issue and it is something that we want to address, and rate relief can help to do that. We can encourage setting better clean energy goals. Like I mentioned, DC does have clean energy goals, but they rely on a credit system. So you can basically just use fossil fuels and then buy credits that are green energy credits and say, oh, it all equals out, but you're still burning fossil fuels. So we can put pressure against that system. We can call attention to the fact that that's not actually clean energy. And we can empower the city to use its power to leverage secure financial and community concessions when needed. Essentially, we can, on the way to our final goal, make a lot of progress for people who need relief most now. And even if we do get to public ownership in a public utility, it doesn't necessarily mean that all shutoffs will be over and we'll use green energy and everything is going to be like the best thing ever. The things that we're talking about are political choices, and public ownership can get us there. At WePower DC, we believe that it's more likely to get us there than the current system, which, as we've already explained, has a lot of the issues that are the reason why we're in the situation we are today. But we have to make the political choices that we want to see. And in order to do that, we believe that public ownership, by putting trust in the community, by putting trust in the people that we know, is going to be more likely to make the right decisions for DC residents than people who work for a corporation based out of a completely different state and have no knowledge about DC at all. So just to just sort of summarize up this section, these are some of the things that we want to achieve with public power in DC. 100% renewable energy, for real, not through credits, but through actually endorsing our grid through green energy. An end to shutoffs and making it politically impossible for anyone to normalize them in the future. Pursuing environmental justice. the energy transition towards green energy, operating a grid system, it's complicated. It requires infrastructure. It requires some things that aren't nice to have next to your house, and the decisions about how those things are made are not usually made fairly, and we can make better choices and make them more fairly. And then we can also improve the rooftop solar projects and DC solar projects and inject those principles of equity into them so that it's not just people who can afford a $20,000 fee, or even a couple $1,000 fee. It can be really for everyone. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Catherine to talk about WePower DC. Unless there's any questions that I can ask. Yes, there are. Okay. I'll go through first.
Okay, sorry, I have two really quick ones, if that's okay. The first one is, this is a really dumb question, but I don't understand how the government works in Northern DC. I know you said that DC has proposed these really ambitious climate goals or energy goals. Are those like laws, and is there a way to like legally say that municipalization didn't happen? Is there a way to legally mandate that Pepco abide by those, or can they still just kind of do whatever they want because they have a monopoly? Secondly, I know the New York campaign win was really, really big, and not everything would be applicable to DC, but I imagine there was some kind of Pepco equivalent in New York. So could you maybe say a little bit more about like how they were able to take that down?
Yeah, okay. Yes. Repeating the question for folks online. The first was if the climate goals are laws and like how they're enforced and how they could be enforced differently under a municipalized system. So yes, they in some ways, there's a lot of different climate goals. So some of them are laws and some of them are sort of like regulations. And that technically is a different thing. But basically the goals are set forth, and then something like the PSC would be the one that's deciding whether or not Pepco or a different actor in a different setting is meeting that climate goal. So whether or not credits meet that climate goal is something that's being decided by the DC government. So in a municipalized system, we can make a different choice and say that that doesn't count, and that doesn't actually count as using renewable energy, if that answers your question.
Yeah, so do they generally not really hold them? It sounds like they're not really holding them accountable enough.
Basically, yes, they're not holding them accountable enough. And Pepco will make the argument that the credit system does represent like climate benefits, and that it's not possible for them to switch entirely to green energy, and that it's like not a useful allocation of resources.
Okay.
Yeah. And on your second question, which was about the public power win in New York State, and how they kind of got there. There's so much to say. I think that, first of all, it was a really impressive campaign. Like they fought quickly. Honestly, it was a quick win by standards, like by socialist standards. I think that first, it was a very targeted attempt of identifying who are the people who have the power to make the change that you want to see. And also the fact that it was done within state politics. So it's New York State didn't pass a law that said we're going to have public power all on, and that was all that they said. It was passed within a budget, within a much larger set of policies. So I think building political power of socialists, getting them elected into the legislature was part of it. Getting the targeting people who had the ability to influence key committees and get key, a budget item like this put in. Those were some of the key things. I think some of it is not, I don't know, some of the specific legislative tactics are not as applicable to DC since we're working with the council system and it's kind of different. I think the lessons that are most comparable to DC are building the community support, getting a lot of people involved in supporting it, in moving it forward, and identifying the actors that are most able to make changes, and then working with them to figure out what's the best way to do this in that setting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
Oh, could you please clarify what you're actually envisioning there were public power to take over DC? Would this be like another department of city government? Would this be a separate nonprofit institution with governance by some council of either elected or, I mean, how would this actually look?
Yeah, the question is, like, how would this actually look if we municipalized in DC? Would it be integrated into a department in the government, a separate organization? I think that's a really great question. I can offer some of my personal thoughts. I'll say, like, as WePower DC, that's one of the central questions we're still figuring out, is what's the best way to advocate for it in DC, because we want to advocate for municipalization in a way that is likely to happen, that we can actually make happen, but will also truly make a difference in how things are operated. And I think there's a balance between those two things. I think we're working with the PSC, which already has some good things about it and many bad things about it. And I think, in my personal view, I envision sort of adapting the systems that we have, like the PSC, to be more effectively in charge of regulating the operation of the utility, and be more accountable directly to citizens. So rather than like appointed through a mayor and approved by council, maybe elected directly, something like that. And I think the biggest tenet that would be different would be removing the ownership by a private company. I think we're still answering like what would replace that. Yeah.
Has there been for that, like, historically, DC or like that, within the content computer, that's been like a point of focus? And it, I guess regardless of whether or not growth is happening, like, what percent of the way do you think just making DC more democratic could go to like addressing some of these policy goals?
Okay, so the question is, what has been done to move the PSC towards democratization, either in DC or other places, and how would that help us? If anyone else has thoughts as well, you're welcome to call me. But I think that honestly, the PSC hasn't moved very far. It's very much like a regulatory body. It's like a very small committee. And it is appointment based. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done there that can make a lot of improvements. And I think there are a lot of questions too of like who gets appointed to the PSC, and there's a history of people who used to work at Pepco or be involved in that being the ones who are appointed. So I think there's like a lot, in some ways that's disappointing, but in other ways, there's sort of simple changes we could make that I think would make progress moving us away from that, even if the PSC was still appointed, but no one who worked at Pepco previously was on it. I think that's better. It's not the best, but it's better. So yeah, I don't really know anything about other specific history. So and also in other places, DC utility, like DC's utility is regulated differently from other places. So it's hard to compare in that specific of a way the PSC to another regulatory body in another city, state, or town. Yeah.
I have a little experience in a lot of it, the different democratization down to historically, you know, how strong is the people type movement and activism raising issues like this. PSC is designed to supposedly be democratic, count by its mandate, all interests. And then there's the People's Council, who is mandated to look out for small business too. So formally, there's some check and balance, but in a passive period of politics, let's say, or movement towards the right, the role of the PSC is generally to not propose new things, but to evaluate what the utility proposes, and then evaluate it, criticize it, and activist connection, which has political fire on it. studies that propose, suggest the alternate ways of doing it. But that's a big sort of push, but it can be done, even in the structure. But generally, it falls back to their mandate, which is always going to lean them towards just considering what because they're mandated, set up to regulate the private system, not a public system. Okay. So their role is sort of passive, but in general.
Sort of like, I guess, to make that example kind of concrete, and thank you for like, I guess, framing it. Over like the past few months, I think there was a DC council basically was looking at bills to promote the electrification of all housing in DC. And a few months ago, PEPCO submitted a brief to the Public Service Commission, the PSC, saying, yep, we'll be able to meet DC's electrification demand for the next 10 years, no problem. And the council started looking at these laws to electrify homes. And all of a sudden, PEPCO said, actually, just kidding, we can't do that.
Yeah.
We actually don't want you guys to push mandatory electrification homes because we don't know if we can meet that demand. We're really not sure, even though they had factored this into the existing calculation that they submitted to PSC just a few months before that. The Public Service Commission didn't particularly do much, but it ended up falling on the Office of People's Counsel and the Attorney General's office, and I guess like activist groups and journalists to sort of like push the fact, like, hold on a minute, you said this, you're now saying this, you're inconsistent. And I think in a lot of ways, like that first step in terms of like democratizing this electricity system is like very much politicizing PEPCO's decisions, the stuff that it submits to the PSC, and how PSC reacts to it in the first place. Because they sort of waved their hands until public pressure said, hold on a minute, this is contradictory. I'm pretty sure that like law is like kind of stalled at this point, what council is doing to change electrification. I could be wrong about that though. But in that sense, like that's a very recent example of how like existing institutions in DC sort of like are having their own cat fights that like, you know, with I guess on us, I guess kind of expose and make sure that we understand how we can get in on them to make sure we push PSC in a better direction. Far short of like what public power is, but at least it's like bringing attention to who's on PSC, how are they chosen, you know, which industries are they in bed with, and like are they going to let PEPCO's actions slide? So, yeah.
It's pretty old, but at least these got fine. And he got very popular, and utilities always hated it because in their argument was that the commission is not supposed to propose how to run the business. They're only supposed to do that. And but these guys planning the framework that sort of mandate or force the utility to consider it could be anything. But all sorts of factors, looking opposed to weight, equity, stronger than returns on income, returns on investment, things like that. So it's extremely flexible, broad framework. I think it's even in play. But research group that mostly works for so they did about old dudes but that leads about Friday. You might consider in our if there's no I think so.
Yeah, are there questions for online too?
Actually, I had a question about specifically the term municipalization.
Yeah.
I guess like the term municipality in and of itself covers a wide range of cities and towns in this country. So I guess my question is to like what scale are you talking about municipalization? We're talking about small square footage, a little bit larger than Rhode Island, but also what is that?
Yeah, the question is about municipalization. What does that look like? At what scale? Can refer to a lot of different sizes. So I think to note that Pepco is also the utility beyond just DC in the region. So I think right now our like legislative political efforts are really focused on DC because that's where there's a big population source, and the DC legislature or the DC council would have the, you know, it's a more direct path to making progress on this. Is basically what WePower DC is looking at, and we have more organizers in DC than the other areas of the DMV. But I think municipalization in DC could mean, it can mean a lot of things. It could mean focusing just on the district. It could mean sort of all of the areas where Pepco is operating in the DMV. And I think that a lot of that depends on sort of what is the political will and what is the ability for us to make progress of setting up an alternative to Pepco, and the DC council and DC government's ability to, you know, to buy out the private company or make some other legislative choice. So I think that the way that WePower DC is advocating for it has a district-wide focus is what I'll say for now. But that's based off of like practicalities and not necessarily the ultimate goal.
See members that I term like the same people who voted who want for their merger still currently on the board and you know what's going to do with the part.
The question is if PSC members have a term limit and if the same people who voted for the merger would be still on it. I don't know the answer to you. Does anyone know?
It's 4 years.
4 years.
Well, but can they be reinstated though, or no?
I guess, honestly, why not?
Like after.
Yeah, because
the-
I think they're appointed by the mayor, right? And then, so I assume it'd be the same term, but then I don't know if they can get reappointed by the same
Probably.
mayor, probably.
Probably.
Yeah,
But I don't know if anyone, I don't know if the same people are still on board.
yeah, okay. The answer is we're not sure if it's the same people. The term, the appointment would be for 4 years, but can probably be reinstated. Questions from online?
Yeah, but
That's a great question. I think that there's definitely something to be said for like a regional wide organizing, especially because as you mentioned, Exelon is across like the whole Northeast, the Midwest. It's a big company. And yeah, I think it's something that like WePower DC and stuff would be open to looking into, but coalitions are also complicated, so.
My understanding is that the regional greenhouse gas initiative, like RGGI, is more of a top level, like state to state coalition of reducing pollution through carbon pricing mechanisms. So super like not even grass top, just straight up like elite game change, you know, elite inside game change like model, like market-based mechanism. I don't think it's necessarily like a venue for grassroots-based organizing, and also I think the whole idea of carbon pricing as a way to tackle climate change to date has not proved itself to be super effective. And I think we should be a little bit more direct in our demands to be like switch to green energy as opposed to like going all the way around the circle in order to like get to green energy, which is like the whole idea.
Okay. Any other questions?
why is it not?
Yeah, well, carbon credits. Okay, to boil it down, I don't want to go on forever because I can. So basically, like carbon credits can mean a lot of different things. There's a lot of carbon market schemes out there. The idea of credit buying is basically that you would have a set goal saying, you know, X amount of thing will be produced by green energy, or we can only have, you know, this amount of carbon released. But you don't actually want to make the decision, or you can't make the decision, whatever, to change how you're actually doing it. So to offset that, you're going to purchase a credit which can mean a lot of different things. Like a very simple example of this would be, you know, you are going on a flight and you buy a carbon offset and they are gonna plant some trees in a forest for you. And they're like, oh, those trees, they take carbon out of the atmosphere, it's offsetting the carbon from your flight. So this kind of happens on like a broader scale with, that's what Pepco is doing when they're buying credits. It's the same sort of idea. And there's a lot of different schemes out there for like how it's operating. But that's the general idea. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, the one scheme that's specific to DC, and it's actually specific to a lot of states, is the renewable energy credit scheme. So rather than like buying trees or like buying land or like carbon capture tech, the way this is supposed to work is that like if you emit past your like legal mandate, you will buy a renewable energy credit, which is like you buy, okay, when you build a solar farm, maybe it costs a bunch of money to build it. And the people who are building it are thinking, shoot, this is maybe too expensive. How do we get extra cash out of it? Renewable energy credits, like states have instituted them to basically like allow solar farms to like sell not only their energy to someone who wants to buy their energy, but also a stream of credits to give them extra income from other energy utility companies that don't, you know, that don't meet their energy goals. So not only do these solar farms or wind farms or renewable energy plants like have the regular revenue stream of selling energy, but they have an extra revenue stream of selling credits to anyone who can't meet their green energy targets elsewhere. The whole idea was that this is supposed to help bring green energy to life across the US, because maybe the costs were initially too high. Now that's not the case. It's really dirt cheap to build a lot of renewable energy across the US. Transmission costs aside, like building a regular project has gotten, especially for solar, is like ridiculously cheap compared to like any fossil fuel source. So it's not fair that like the renewable energy credit system that states are using in DC as well are actually able to like bring new energy onto the grid anymore. So in that sense, it's not particularly like offsetting any emissions, really. I mean, revenue's nice for anyone who's building a solar farm and wants extra cash, but it doesn't have that same additionality that it might have used to. And DC basically says, we have these green energy targets. If you don't meet them, you can pay renewable energy credits to, you know, top it off and pay some extra compliance fees for credits you don't buy. So I think, I don't know, DC is with a bunch of states in the region. They've all like standardized their REC, their credit systems to match each other. So Pepco can buy credits from like solar power, I don't know, in Texas or something like that. And I don't actually know the geographical reach of DC's credit REC standards, but that's like the specific system that we're in right now that I think a lot of states use in different ways. But yeah, I'm not convinced it works either. So,
Just bring it all
It's like double
more.
dipping.
yeah, it's double.
It's double. You're like getting 2 energy credits, renewable energy credits for one renewable energy.
Yeah.
Thing.
Pretty much. Yeah, to kind of bring it more concisely, it's like, how do you really know you're making a difference by buying these things? Again, it goes back to the theme of market-based mechanism. Does it really work? And then the second thing is like, are you really making a difference? Thing relies on enforcing authority and a mechanism. So that goes back to like, do you have a strong state that like the market-based mechanism is always going to prioritize the market over state capacity and like state being able to enforce these things. So it's like, are you really making a difference? And you probably can't prove that. So
what does it mean?
exactly. It's a fun like mathematical game though.
Yeah, that's what capitalism is.
Cool. Thanks, Claire. So yeah, we're just going to talk a little bit about WePower DC. And so I think Claire touched on this earlier, but WePower DC is a priority campaign of Metro DC DSA. And so we're the main expression of the chapter's eco-socialist working group. And so eco-socialism is a tenet that emphasizes the role of capitalism at the core of environmental crises. And so I think that what Winston was trying to point out earlier is that, is it really possible to solve some of these issues like using capitalism as the function? And so, you know, eco-socialism kind of pushes back against that idea. And so public ownership is a critical demand of the socialist movement, and public power was part of the Green New Deal. And so we're organizing to build a movement that can pressure our primary target. So local to DC is the DC Council to pass public power legislation, take control of our electric utility. So campaign history started in 2020, where there was a no Pepco pledge for candidates running for a DC Council in the primary race. And then in 2021, focus on an energy justice campaign to forgive utility debt and to try to maintain the utility shutoff moratorium as the pandemic relief policies were lifted. So kind of recognizing that as the pandemic emergency was ended, there was going to be a reinstatement of shutoffs. And, you know, our idea is kind of the power is like a human right, and no one should be able to lose power because they can't pay for it. In August of 2021, WePower formally joined DSA. And in 2022, we launched the Public Power Pledge during the DC primary election, and so secured the support of 8 candidates that were running, and including 3 current DC Council members, Zach Parker, Robert White, and Brianna Nadeau. And now in 2023, we're continuing to build the movement to pass public power legislation. And so we're trying to hone our vision on what public power would look like, trying to build consensus around, what public power would mean for DC and how we would make that happen. Working with pledge signers, so on the council, to introduce legislation that can be voted on, and organizing communities to build this broad-based coalition, so showing that we have broad support from community members. And so within WePower, there's several goals, and so I think that's what's great about organizing, is that there's many different things that we're fighting for that can make a difference. So like we said before, we're working with DC Council members to introduce public power legislation. So maybe that's the main focus of the campaign right now. But we're also trying to build political power and pressuring council members by encouraging people to sign the public power pledge, getting out in communities and kind of advocating for public power, and encouraging people to kind of show support for that. We're also looking to begin seeding public power campaigns in Montgomery County and Prince George's County. We are focused primarily on DC right now, but it'd be great to show broader support for other places that PEPCO operates for public power. And ensuring public power in DC actually makes a difference through continued focus on energy justice issues, such as banning shutoffs, and also increasing the amount of renewables. So our ongoing work, we're looking to engage with DC government committees on utilities and energy, including coordinating with Zach Parker's Energy Justice Policy Circle. That's been a really fruitful collaboration. Also hosting community tabling events, so going to farmers markets, going to public parks, and talking with people that live in DC and about their experiences with PEPCO, about their experiences with their power, and trying to understand some of the issues that they're facing, and how public power can address some of that. Also actively recruiting new organizers and doing events such as this, which is a political education event, both as a recruiting tool, but also just to hopefully make people more informed about how power systems work and the benefits of public power. So we're also actively, more recently, organizing the AltaGas campaign against this Pipes 3 legislation. That's like a very short-term kind of goal that's coming up, trying to stop this bill from being passed. And yeah, continuing to develop other political education events and resources. And so we're actively recruiting and developing organizers. So there's many of us here today to do all these different things, including political education, legislative, communications, and internal organizing work. And so I can say for myself, I actually ended up joining WePower in August of last year. And so, a lot of us are rather newer, and it's a really great organization and something to be a part of. And so the way we kind of work is these kind of working group circles, so including political education, which is kind of the working group that's putting on this event, also doing communications in terms of publishing in the Washington Socialist, doing social media campaigns, internal organizing is trying to recruit new organizers, making sure that kind of the wheels inside are functioning, make sure everyone's on the same page. Community engagement, going out to the community and like trying to engage with DC residents. Legislative includes, drafting legislation that can eventually be voted on, working with Zach Parker's Energy Justice Circle, and research, trying to, come up with all the juicy numbers that you saw in today's presentation for it to kind of back up, the claims that we're making. And then the central organizing committee is, kind of represented by members of each of the different circles. And so with that, if you want to learn more about us, of course, we'll be sticking around, but our next organizing committee meeting, which is kind of like our general group meeting, I would say, is tomorrow, Wednesday, May 31st at 7:30. It's on Zoom, so, come check it out. Everyone is welcome. And we're also having a happy hour this Friday, June 2nd at 6 p.m. at Sunny's Pizza, which is on George Avenue, 3120 George Avenue, Northwest. You could read that. So yeah, and if you want to if these don't work for you, but you want to chat with us, please reach out for a one-on-one conversation. You can email WePowerDC@gmail.com. And I also have a QR code to sign the public power pledge here, and that should also set you up for a one-on-one conversation if you're interested. And we're happy to take questions now or later. So thank you.
No question?
No questions? Cool. All right.
Yes, don't go away yet.
One more thing. Thank you. Thanks to our presenters for that wonderful presentation. Thanks for you all for coming out tonight. A couple more political education related things. By the way, my name is David Kai, pronouns are he, him. I'm one of the organizers of the Socialist Night Schools. If you're interested in getting involved in political education, please reach out to me. A couple of things we're working on. One is our next night school, June 15th, 6:30 at the Mount Pleasant Neighborhood Library. We're doing Demystifying the Federal Reserve with author Tim Barker. We should be getting a couple more things on the calendar soon, including an event on social housing that should be coming in July, a few more things after that. In addition, we have a walking tour coming up on July 1st. It's Villains of Silicon Valley in DC. It's with author Malcolm Harris on his drawing from research from his new book, Palo Alto, A History of California and Capitalism in the World. We're going to be tying that to things that are happening in DC. Walking tours are great. Please come check it out. And then the last thing is we've got our new reading groups signing up for summer. So we've got a handful of things coming. We've got people doing Black Jacobins by Jane, Let This Radicalize You by Marion Cobb and Kelly Hayes, Labor Power and Strategy by John Womack. There's only a couple more. Red State Revolt by Eric Blank, Poor People's Campaign, sponsored by Stomp Out Slumlords, and then Marks at the Museum will be selections from William Morris. If you're interested in any of those things, you can come and talk to me. If you're on Zoom, you can talk to me because I'll be back there in a second. Also, we're going to send this out to you if you've RSVP'd for this. So be looking for an email with all that stuff. So thank you.
Hey.
Turning them on with you.
Good stuff.
Yeah.